The great hall of the Valorian High Court glittered with 1,000 floating lights, and Lady Salith Varn stood at its center, like a prisoner awaiting judgment. She kept her spine straight, and her 4 eyes fixed on the far wall, refusing to show weakness to the nobles, who whispered behind their clawed hands. Her family name had once commanded respect across 12 star systems, but debts and bad fortune had stripped away everything except this final humiliation. A political marriage arranged by creditors who wanted to make an example of fallen nobility. The massive doors at the end of the hall opened with a soft hiss, and Salith forced herself to look at the creature she would spend her life bound to. A human male walked forward with steady steps, flanked by 2 Earth diplomats in simple gray uniforms. He was smaller than she expected. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as one of the weaker species, lacking the telepathy of the Mindari, or the armored scales of the Kreth, or the venomous fangs of her own Valorian people. They were tolerated in galactic society as servants and laborers, and nothing more. The human stopped before the ceremonial platform and looked up at her. His eyes were dark and calm like deep water, and he carried a long rectangular case in one hand that he set down beside his feet with careful precision. This is the one called Marcus Cole," announced the officiating priest, his voice dripping with barely hidden contempt. "Representative of Earth's Northern Federation, offered in accordance with Trade Agreement 774 to settle the outstanding debts of House Varn." Laughter rippled through the assembled nobles. Salith heard her cousin Draven's voice, loudest among them, his cruel amusement cutting through the air like broken glass. The ceremony itself was brief and cold. Marcus spoke only 10 words throughout the entire proceeding, responding to questions with simple answers, in a voice so quiet that the priest had to lean forward to hear him. When they placed the bonding marks on their wrists, his hand was steady and warm against her trembling fingers. Salith expected many things from her new husband in those first days. She expected resentment, or anger, or perhaps desperate attempts to escape his situation. She expected him to rage against the unfairness of being traded like cargo. Instead, she found only silence. Marcus moved through the estate like a ghost, observing everything and saying almost nothing. He ate his meals without complaint, and slept in a small room adjacent to her chambers, without ever asking for more. When servants spoke to him rudely, he simply nodded and continued with whatever task occupied his attention. It infuriated her more than cruelty ever could have. "Why do you not speak?" she demanded one evening, finding him in the estate's garden, watching the twin moons rise. "Why do you not rage against what has been done to you?" He turned to look at her, and something in those dark eyes made her breath catch. It was not the look of a beaten creature accepting its fate. It was something else entirely, something she could not name. "What good would rage do?" he asked, his voice soft and measured. "Words without purpose are just noise." She had no answer for that. The weeks passed, and Salith began to notice things about her silent husband that disturbed her in ways she could not explain. She noticed how the servants who had initially mocked him now greeted him with genuine warmth. She noticed how he remembered every name and every small detail that others shared with him. She noticed how problems that had plagued the estate for years suddenly found solutions through his quiet intervention. Most disturbing of all, she noticed how he positioned himself between her and doorways whenever they were in the same room. She noticed how his eyes tracked movement with predatory precision. She noticed the strange calluses on his hands that spoke of years holding something far more dangerous than farming tools. One night, she could not sleep, and she wandered the darkened hallways until a sound drew her toward the old training courtyard that had stood unused since her father's death. She pressed herself against the shadowed archway and watched in stunned silence. Marcus moved through the moonlight like water flowing over stone, In his hands was a long curved blade that sang through the air with each perfect arc. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground as he spun and struck and blocked invisible enemies with a grace that made her hearts pound against her ribs. This was not the movement of a simple laborer. This was the movement of something far more dangerous, wearing the mask of a quiet man. He stopped suddenly, and she realized with a jolt of fear that he knew she was there. He had probably known since the moment she arrived. He sheathed the blade with a soft sound and turned to face her hiding spot. "You can come out," he said, and there was almost amusement in his quiet voice. She stepped into the courtyard, her pride refusing to let her flee. "What are you?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the sword in his hands. "My family has carried this blade for 400 years. It has never been drawn in anger without a cause, and I hope it never will be again." "That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give you right now." She should have been angry. She should have demanded the truth. Instead, she found herself returning to her chambers with more questions than before, and a strange new feeling growing in her chest. The message arrived 3 days later. Her cousin, Lord Draven Varn, was coming to visit, and the entire estate knew what that meant. He came not to congratulate, but to humiliate, not to welcome, but to wound. And somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, Salith heard the soft whisper of steel through air, and wondered what would happen when the serpent met the silent wolf. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and Salith found herself doing something she never expected. She was watching her human husband with genuine curiosity instead of bitter resentment. The estate on Thyros 7 had never run more smoothly. Marcus had somehow transformed the struggling frontier property into a model of quiet efficiency without ever raising his voice or giving a single command. The workers who had once grumbled about serving a disgraced noble now spoke of the human with something close to reverence. Salith observed him one morning as he helped repair a broken irrigation pump alongside the maintenance crew. His hands moved with practiced skill, and he listened with complete attention when the old Kreth mechanic explained what had gone wrong. By midday, the pump was working better than it had in years, and the mechanic was teaching Marcus a drinking song from his homeworld. "How do you do it?" Salith asked him that evening as they shared a meal in the small dining room. "How do you make them trust you so quickly?" Marcus set down his eating utensil and considered her question with the same careful attention he gave everything. "I listen," he said simply. "Most beings spend their whole lives waiting for someone to truly hear them. When you give them that gift, they remember. That cannot be all there is to it. It is a start." She wanted to press further, but something in his calm gaze told her he would reveal nothing more than he chose to. Instead, she found herself telling him about the estate's history, about her childhood running through these halls when her family still held power, about the slow collapse that had led her to this arranged marriage. He listened without interruption, and when she finished, he simply nodded. "Thank you for sharing that with me." It was such a small thing, those few words, yet they settled something restless in her chest that she had not even known was there. The nights grew colder as the season turned, and Salith developed a habit she could not quite explain. She would rise in the dark hours before dawn and make her way to the training courtyard, where she could watch Marcus move through his sword forms in the moonlight. She never announced her presence anymore, and he never acknowledged it. There was a strange understanding between them, a shared space where words were not needed. One night she brought a warming drink and sat on the ancient stone bench at the courtyard's edge. When he finished his practice, he sat beside her and accepted the cup she offered without comment. "What were you before you came here?" she asked, emboldened by the intimacy of the darkness. He was silent for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely louder than the wind. "A soldier." the kind they do not talk about. What does that mean? It means I did things that kept my people safe, things that required silence and patience, and the willingness to become something others would fear if they knew it existed. She looked at his profile in the pale light of the moons, seeing him as if for the first time. Are you dangerous, Marcus Cole? Yes. The simple honesty of his answer should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel something entirely unexpected. It made her feel safe. Why did you agree to this marriage? She pressed. A man with your abilities could have refused. You could have fought or fled. Why submit to being traded like livestock? He turned to look at her, and his dark eyes held depths she was only beginning to understand. Because sometimes the battlefield chooses you. Because I looked at the reports about House Varn, and saw a woman who had been stripped of everything except her pride. And because I wanted to see what would grow if someone gave you the chance to rebuild. Salith felt heat rise to her face. No one had ever spoken to her with such direct honesty. You chose this? I requested it. The revelation stole her breath. All this time she had believed him a victim like herself, when in truth he had walked into this situation with full knowledge and purpose. She did not know whether to feel grateful or manipulated. That night she could not sleep. She sat at her console and searched the galactic databases for anything she could find about human military history. Most of it was sparse and unimpressive, stories of small conflicts on a single unremarkable planet. But then she found the gaps. Entire sections of records were classified at the highest levels, sealed by the Valorian hegemony's own intelligence services. References to human special forces units were redacted. Reports from first contact missions simply stopped mid-sentence, with black bars covering whatever came next. Someone had gone to great effort to hide what humans were truly capable of. Someone powerful had decided that the galaxy should see humanity as weak and primitive and harmless. Silith closed the console with shaking hands. She thought of Marcus in the moonlight, his blade singing through the air with deadly grace. She thought of his patience and his silence, and the way he watched everything with those calculating eyes. What had she married? The answer came 3 days later, when a servant burst into her chambers with terror written across his features. Lord Draven Varn had arrived at the estate's landing platform with 50 armed guards and a smile that promised suffering. Salith rose from her chair and steadied herself. She had known this moment would come. Her cousin had never forgiven her for being born to the main family line, while he languished in a lesser branch. She found Marcus waiting for her in the main hall. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression as calm as still water. He has brought soldiers, she told him. He means to take everything. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes. We cannot fight him. We have no weapons, no guards. We have nothing. He looked at her with those dark and patient eyes. We have time. And I have been patient for a very long while. The main doors opened, and Lord Draven swept in like a poisonous wind. His scaled face twisted with cruel delight as his guards spread out to secure the room. He stopped before Salith and her silent husband, and his laugh echoed off the ancient walls. "Dear cousin," he said with mocking sweetness, "how wonderful to see what has become of you. Married to a primitive, living in this crumbling ruin. Our ancestors must weep in their tombs." Salith held her ground. "You have no authority here, Draven. This estate is mine by law." "Ah, but that is why I have come. You see, I have discovered an ancient law that voids any marriage between a Valorian noble and a species classified as non-sentient labor stock. Your little human pet does not count as a legal spouse, which means your debts fall to the nearest male relative. That would be me." The guards closed in around them, and Salith felt her heart sink. But beside her, Marcus remained perfectly still, and when she looked at his face, she saw something that made her blood run cold. He was smiling. For the first time in 3 months, her silent husband was smiling. and it was not a pleasant smile at all. The days that followed were the worst of Salek's life. Lord Draven had taken control of everything with the cold efficiency of a practiced predator, and his guards roamed the estate like hungry beasts searching for prey. He had claimed the main house for himself and forced Saleth into the servants' quarters. He had ordered the workers to address him as their rightful lord. He had made it clear that any resistance would be met with immediate and brutal punishment. But his cruelest attention was reserved for Marcus. "Kneel," Draven commanded on the third day, standing in the great hall, surrounded by his armed guards. "Kneel before your betters, human." Marcus stood with his hands at his sides, his dark eyes fixed on Draven's face. He did not kneel. He did not speak. He simply watched with that terrible, patient stillness. Draven's smile faltered for just a moment. "I said kneel, creature." Marcus remained standing like a statue carved from stone. The first blow came from behind. A guard struck Marcus across the back with an armored fist, and Saleth heard herself cry out as he staggered forward. But he did not fall. He caught his balance, and straightened, and turned those dark eyes back to Draven without a sound. "Again," Draven ordered, and his voice had lost some of its confidence. The guards beat Marcus for what felt like hours. They struck him with fists and feet and the butts of their weapons. They drove him to his knees again and again, and each time he rose back to his feet without ever breaking eye contact with Draven. Saleth screamed at them to stop. She tried to push through the guards to reach her husband, but they held her back with rough hands. Tears of fury streamed down her face as she watched the man who had shown her nothing but kindness being brutalized for her cousin's amusement. "Why do you not fight back?" she screamed at Marcus. "Why do you not do something?" He turned his bloodied face toward her, and in that moment she saw past the damage to the sharp intelligence burning beneath. "Not yet," he said, his voice calm despite the split lips and swelling bruises. "There are 40 armed men here and 200 workers who would die in the crossfire. The math does not work yet." Draven laughed, but there was something hollow in the sound. "Listen to the pet calculate. Does it think numbers will save it?" Marcus said nothing. He simply watched and waited. That night, Saleth was permitted to visit Marcus in the storage room where they had confined him. She brought medical supplies and clean water, and she knelt beside him in the darkness, with fury and grief warring in her chest. "You could have fought," she whispered, as she cleaned the blood from his face. "I have seen you train. You could have killed at least some of them." "And then what?" he asked, his voice steady despite his injuries. "The survivors would have slaughtered the workers as punishment. They would have killed you to send a message. My death would have accomplished nothing, except more death." "So you simply endure?" "I wait for the right moment. There is a difference." She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. This was not the voice of a man who had surrendered. This was the voice of someone playing a game she did not understand, moving pieces on a board she could not see. "Draven has announced a hunt tomorrow," she told him. "You are to be the prey. It is an old Valorian tradition for humiliating slaves and criminals. They will release you into the hunting grounds, and his men will track you down. No human has ever survived." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that made her blood freeze in her veins. He laughed. It was a soft sound, almost gentle, but it carried an edge that spoke of violence held in perfect check. "A hunt," he repeated. "He is giving me open ground and time to prepare. He has no idea what he has just done. Marcus, you cannot fight 40 armed soldiers with your bare hands." He reached out and took her hand in his. His grip was warm despite the cold of the storage room. "Saleth, I need you to listen carefully. Tomorrow, when the hunt begins, I need you to gather the workers and take them to the east cellar. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, do not come out until you see my face." "What are you planning?" He rose to his feet with a grace that should have been impossible given his injuries. He crossed to the corner of the room and pulled aside a loose panel in the wall. Behind it was his long case, hidden there since the first day of Draven's occupation. He opened it, and moonlight from the small window gleamed on ancient steel. His katana lay nestled in dark cloth alongside a shorter blade and a set of clothing unlike anything she had seen before, black and fitted, with strange patterns that seemed to drink the light. "Do you remember when you asked me what I was?" he said. "I told you I was a soldier, the kind they do not talk about. I remember." He lifted the katana with reverent hands and drew it from its sheath. The blade whispered like a secret, and the air itself seemed to grow heavier in its presence. "On Earth, we have a tradition. We do not draw our swords unless we intend to use them. Once the blade leaves the sheath, there is no turning back." Salith stared at the weapon, at the man holding it, at the cold promise written in every line of his battered body. What happens tomorrow? Marcus slid the blade back into its sheath with a soft click. "Tomorrow I teach your cousin why humans were never conquered. Tomorrow I show him what happens when a wolf stops pretending to be a sheep." He turned to face her, and in the darkness his eyes gleamed with something ancient and terrible and utterly without mercy. "Tomorrow I stop being patient." Salith should have been afraid. She should have fled from this stranger wearing her husband's face. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed her lips to his. It was brief and fierce and tasted of blood and desperate hope. "Make them all pay." Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of a predator finally slipping free of its chains. "I intend to." The hunting grounds of Thyros 7 stretched across 100 kilometers of dense alien forest and rocky canyons. Lord Draven stood on his aerial observation platform and smiled as his guards released the human into the wilderness below. "Begin the hunt," he announced with theatrical grandeur. "Let us see how long the little creature survives." 40 of his best soldiers descended into the forest with tracking beasts and advanced sensor equipment. They were veterans of a dozen campaigns, hunters who had run down prey far more dangerous than a single unarmed human. This would be over within the hour. Draven settled into his comfortable chair and poured himself a drink. He intended to savor every moment of this entertainment. The first hour passed without incident. His soldiers reported finding tracks that led deeper into the forest, footprints that doubled back on themselves in confusing patterns. The tracking beasts seemed agitated, unable to hold a consistent scent. "He runs in circles," Draven laughed. "The stupid creature does not even know how to flee properly." But then the comms went silent. Squad 7 stopped responding first. Their last transmission was a confused report about movement in the trees above them, and then nothing. Squad 3 went dark 10 minutes later, their commander's voice cutting off mid-sentence. Draven sat forward in his chair. "What is happening down there?" His tactical officer worked frantically at the sensor station. "I do not know, my lord. Their life signs just disappeared. All of them." "Disappeared?" "One moment they were there, and then they were gone." Draven ordered the remaining squads to converge on Squad 7's last position. When they arrived, they found only bodies. 8 soldiers lay scattered across the forest floor, each killed with a single precise wound. Their weapons were still in their hands. Their eyes were still open, with expressions of complete surprise. The human had not fled. He had circled back and struck from the shadows like a ghost. Draven felt the first cold tendril of fear wrap around his hearts. Send in the heavy units. Find him and kill him. More soldiers descended into the forest with heavier armor and stronger weapons. They moved in tight formations with overlapping fields of fire. They swept the area with every sensor technology known to the hegemony. It did not matter. Men began dying in ones and twos. A soldier would fall behind by a single step and simply vanish. A guard would turn to check a suspicious sound and never turn back. The reports that came through the comms grew increasingly frantic as hardened veterans started to break. "It is hunting us," one sergeant screamed into his communicator. "The human is hunting us. We need to fall back. We need to—" The transmission ended in a wet, gurgling sound. Draven stood at the railing of his platform with white-knuckled fists. Below him, the forest had become a graveyard, and somewhere in those shadows moved a single human male who was systematically destroying his entire force. By noon, half of his soldiers were dead or had fled into the wilderness, and the remainder had abandoned the hunt entirely. They huddled in a defensive circle at the forest's edge, weapons pointed outward, jumping at every sound. And then Marcus emerged from the tree line. He walked with slow, measured steps, crossing the open ground between the forest and the soldiers, with the casual grace of a man out for a morning stroll. His black clothing was torn in places, and dark stains marked where blades had come close, but not close enough. In his hands, he carried his katana, and the ancient steel gleamed with fresh blood. The soldiers opened fire. Draven watched through his magnification screen as hundreds of energy bolts screamed toward the human. He watched, expecting to see the creature torn apart by superior firepower. Instead, he watched something impossible. Marcus moved like water flowing around stones. He read the trajectory of each shot before the trigger was pulled. He slipped between beams of lethal energy with inches to spare. He closed the distance between himself and the soldiers in a series of movements too fast for the eye to follow. And then his blade began to sing. Draven had seen combat before. He had witnessed battles between trained warriors of a dozen species. He had never seen anything like this. The human flowed through the soldiers like a force of nature, his katana tracing silver arcs through the air that left death in their wake. Men fell before they could scream. Armor that should have stopped any blade parted like paper. The firing line collapsed into chaos and then into silence. It was over in less than a minute. Marcus stood alone among the bodies, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He looked up at Draven's observation platform, and even at this distance, his dark eyes seemed to burn with cold fire. He raised his sword in a silent salute. Then he turned toward the estate and began to walk. Draven scrambled for the platform's controls. "Take us back to the house, now. We need to evacuate. We need reinforcements. We need—" "My lord," his pilot interrupted, "our engines have been damaged. Someone sabotaged them before we launched. We cannot move." Draven stared at the pilot with dawning horror. The human had planned this. He had known exactly how this day would unfold from the very beginning. Every moment of patient silence, every beating he endured, every insult he swallowed had been part of a calculation leading to this single devastating outcome. The platform lurched as Draven forced it into a barely controlled descent. He had to reach the estate. He had to reach the hostages. He had to find some leverage before the demon in human form caught up with him. As he fled toward the main house, he heard something that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his very short life. Behind him, growing steadily closer, came the sound of unhurried footsteps. Marcus was not running. He did not need to run. He knew exactly where Draven would go, and he was in no hurry at all. Salith huddled in the east cellar, with 200 workers pressed around her. She could hear distant explosions and weapons fire, and with each sound, the workers flinched and whispered prayers to gods she did not recognize. The old Kreth mechanic sat beside her with a strange calm on his weathered face. "The human told me this morning that we should trust him," he said quietly. "He looked me in the eyes and promised that today would be the last day we lived in fear. I believe him." "How can you be so certain?" The old man smiled. "Because I have lived long enough to recognize a predator when I see one, and that human was never prey. He was simply waiting for the right moment to show his teeth." The sounds of battle grew closer, and then stopped entirely. For a long, terrible moment, there was only silence. Then the cellar door opened, and Draven stumbled down the stairs, with wild eyes and trembling hands. Behind him came his last 5 guards, their weapons drawn, their faces pale with terror. "Salith," Draven gasped. "Dear cousin, you will come with me. You will be my shield against that monster." He grabbed her arm and dragged her up the stairs, ignoring her struggles. His guards formed a desperate perimeter around them as they emerged into the estate's main hall. The front doors hung open. Through them she could see the courtyard where she had watched Marcus practice his deadly arts so many nights. The twin moons cast silver light across a scene of devastation. Burn marks scarred the walls from artillery strikes, and the distant forest still smoldered from Draven's failed attempts to stop his pursuer. A figure appeared in the doorway. Marcus walked through the ruined entrance like death taking human form. His black clothing was torn and stained, his face marked with small cuts from near misses. His katana held loose at his side, with its blade dark from use. But his eyes were clear and calm, and he moved with the same quiet grace she had fallen in love with over 3 months of silent nights. He stopped 50 feet from Draven's pathetic defensive line, and simply waited. "Stay back," Draven screamed, pressing a plasma blade against Salith's throat. "One more step and I kill her. I swear I will." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying the scene with those calculating eyes. Then he spoke, and his voice carried clearly across the hall with a power she had never heard from him before. "You asked me once what I was," he said. "You called me a mute pet, a dull blade, a primitive creature fit only for servitude. I let you believe that, because it suited my purpose. But since you are about to die, I will give you the truth." His words fell like stones into still water, and even the guards seemed frozen by their weight. On Earth, we have a saying, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." My people learned long ago that the universe is not kind to the weak. So we became strong in ways that others would fear if they understood. And then we learned to hide that strength behind silence and patience and the appearance of insignificance. He raised his katana, and moonlight rippled along its edge like liquid fire. "I am what my people call a blade saint, one of 800 humans trained from childhood in the oldest arts of war. We carry swords not because we lack better weapons, but because we do not need better weapons. A true master requires only a single edge to change the course of history." Draven's hand shook against Salith's throat. "You lie. Humans are nothing. You are cattle. You are—" "We are patient," Marcus interrupted. "We watch. We learn. We remember every species that underestimated us, every cruelty, every insult, every moment of contempt. And when the time is right, we remind the galaxy why humanity was never conquered." He took a single step forward, and the guards flinched back, despite their weapons and their numbers. "Your entire force is destroyed. Every soldier who fled this place will tell the story of what happened here today. By tomorrow, your hegemony's intelligence services will be scrambling to understand how a single human with a sword dismantled a professional military unit. And they will find nothing, because humans do not share our secrets with those who see us as livestock." Another step. His eyes never left Draven's face. "You have one chance to survive this night. Release my wife, renounce your claim to this estate, and leave. I will let you carry the story of your failure to every corner of the galaxy as a warning to others who might think humans are easy prey." Draven's scales had gone pale with terror. The plasma blade in his hand trembled against Salith's skin. His guards looked at each other with the desperate calculation of men choosing between certain death and possible survival. "If you do not release her," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried even more weight than his previous words, "I will kill every being in this room except my wife and the workers you tried to enslave. I will do it slowly enough for you to understand exactly how outmatched you were. And the last thing you will see before you die is my face, so you can carry that image into whatever afterlife your people believe in." The plasma blade clattered to the floor as Draven's nerve finally broke. He shoved Salith away from him and fell to his knees with his hands raised. His guards dropped their weapons a moment later. Marcus walked past them without a second glance and caught Salith in his arms. She buried her face against his chest and held him so tightly that her muscles ached. "It is over," he said softly. "You are safe now." She looked up at his face, at the calm patience that had returned to his eyes, now that the violence was done. "Everything you said, was that true, about the Blade Saints and humanity hiding its strength?" He smiled, and it was the warm, gentle smile she had come to love in their quiet months together. "Every word. My people have been playing the long game since before we reached the stars. We let others believe we were weak, because it made them careless. We hid our strength, because the greatest weapon is the one your enemy does not know exists. Why tell me now? Because you asked, and because I trust you to understand what this knowledge means." In the days that followed, Draven fled the planet in disgrace, and word of what happened on Thyros 7 spread across the hegemony like wildfire. Intelligence agencies opened classified files and found only more questions. Military analysts studied the sensor recordings and could not explain how a single human had accomplished the impossible. And in the quiet of their restored estate, Salith stood with her husband in the moonlit courtyard and watched him return his blade to its case with reverent hands. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus closed the case and turned to face her. "Now we live. I will be your partner and your protector and your friend for as long as you want me. And if anyone ever threatens you again, they will learn the same lesson your cousin learned today." She took his hand and pressed her forehead against his. "I spent months wondering what kind of creature I had married. I think I finally understand." "And what am I?" Salith smiled and pulled him close. "You are human, and apparently that is far more dangerous than anyone ever realized." Across the galaxy, in countless halls of power, beings who had dismissed humanity as insignificant began to reconsider. They pulled old files and re-examined old assumptions. They looked at the quiet humans working in their midst and wondered what secrets hid behind those patient eyes. And somewhere on Earth, in a training hall that existed on no official records, 799 other Blade Saints continued their ancient practice. They moved through forms that had been perfected over centuries. They carried blades that had never been drawn in anger without cause. But they were ready. They had always been ready. The galaxy simply had not known enough to be afraid.